So we understand this concept that masculine and feminine in their spiritual archetypes are a provider and a recipient, but not a recipient in the sense of she only gets what she gets and that's all she ever has. A true recipient in the sense that she turns around and becomes a provider as well, and actually ends up becoming a greater provider than him. Now, can I share with you something? Are you okay with a moment of empathy toward men? Can we do that? Okay. Well, okay, you'll consider maybe. So I want to just share with you one of the hardest things about being a man. Is you're already laughing, you don't want to even be empathetic to it. Okay, maybe I shouldn't. Maybe my vulnerability here is misplaced on the behalf of men. I'm going to put it out there because I think it'll create greater shalom bayis, greater peace in your home, if you'll understand this pain point that almost all men experience to some degree. It's just something to be aware of. I told you before, masculinity is about doing. Another way of saying that is providing. Being the initiator, the giver. That's what masculinity is. But then I told you femininity is not a truly passive recipient. She takes that, turns around, amplifies it, infinitely upgrades it, and gives it back. So I'm not asking you for pity. I just want you to consider this. Do you understand then how strange it is to be a man when intuitively you're aware that your entire function is to be a provider, to be a giver, specifically a giver to your feminine counterpart, which is your wife, and that your whole identity is about being a giver, and at the end of the whole process, who's the bigger giver? She's a bigger giver than you. And you'll never be the kind of giver that she is. So I don't know if you realize this, but for men, and very few men can articulate this, but in my experience, when I've articulated this for men, they're like, yeah, that's true. She's always going to be the bigger giver. Like, I'm going to give you an example that the Talmud uses, and if you are reductionist about it, you might think it's mundane or trivial, but if you understand it on a spiritual level, I think it's profound. The Talmud says, who's a bigger giver of tzedakah, of charity? The woman or the man? And of course, it's talking about traditional gender roles, but the point is the metaphor here. It says that a pauper comes to the door and he asks for something to eat. The man went out and he worked to buy flour and he brought home the flour. Can the pauper, the beggar at the door, eat flour? No. He eats the bread that the wife baked from the dough that she needed from the flour that the husband brought home. Now, I understand, don't get caught up on the particulars of this because it's a metaphor, because I understand today women go out and they work and they buy the flour as well. But what we're describing here is something existential about masculinity and femininity, that there's something about masculinity. He's the one who, so to speak, brings home the flour. He brings home the raw materials. But the raw materials themselves are not useful. Raw materials are raw materials. The woman is the one who takes raw materials and makes them useful. She puts them into a form that actually benefits people. Like I was saying before, she can't impregnate herself, but in the end, once she's impregnated, she's the one who delivers that baby, which is an incomparable upgrade. So she's always the one who ends up delivering, no pun intended, I guess, with the birth metaphor, but she's the one who ends up delivering that which is actually of value. So he's the one, he's getting upstaged. Because whatever he provides her, she takes it, she upgrades it, and gives it back to him in a far superior fashion to how she received it. So you understand, again, I'm not trying to get your pity, but you understand why that might be a source of insecurity for men. Do you understand why it might be a source of insecurity for them? Okay.
Can I just add to
yes.
something? I want to
props
to Baralea. We were filming, we recorded a podcast, and we were just at Spachet, we were just doing one on marriage and masculine and feminine, and she gave a wonderful concept, and I did it I just want to add to the insecurities or the upset about, how men feel. I might not be doing it justice, but she was describing Adam and Eve and how men come essentially from the ground, from nothingness, whereas women come from something. They come from the side of Adam. And it can sometimes be this like insecurity of being felt like, they don't want that to be something that's shown, or that's like something that they fear to feel, whereas that kind of plays into it a little bit.
Yes, there's a certain essential insecurity. In this particular instance, what I want you to understand is that which defines a man is actually something that women do better than men. So I just want you to process that. That which defines a man, not something that's incidental to masculinity. The very definition of masculinity is their ability to provide and to give. Women actually do that thing better than men.
Do you think that every man defines himself by that? Do you think that every man defines himself by that role?
I think that men are defined by that role on an existential level, and we are either in tune with it or less in tune with it. But the truth is there whether or not we're aligned with it on a conscious level. So, in today's day and age, we're very much conditioned by certain messages about everything, really. So we may be further away from these truths, but that's why we have the teachings of the Torah to come in here and sort of just say, hey, these are the truths, and reality check. Sometimes it's helpful to get back to the things that are inescapable. And the reason why I talk about stuff like this really is because if we don't know what's inescapably true, we end up having a lot of heartache, because when you're living in conflict with reality, even if you don't know that's the reality, it causes frustration. Okay, so that's the reason why we're speaking about these ideas. But do you understand now what I was saying before, that there's a certain inherent insecurity that a man has, that he's a provider and yet she's always going to be a greater provider, because what she receives from him, she upgrades it and gives it back to him? Okay, you understand this? Okay, so without going into great length about a male role, I'll just tell you one quick thing. When I speak to men, and I'm not going to tell you everything I speak to men, because it's actually not so healthy for everybody to know everybody else's spiritual role, because then we keep tabs on each other and it can feel like we're being judged. So I won't tell the men everything I told you, and I'm not going to tell you everything that I tell men. But one of the things that is very helpful to a man to understand is that, yes, it's true. You, men, whatever you give your wife, she's going to turn around, upgrade it, and give it back in infinitely upgraded fashion. But what makes you indispensable, I'm saying you, men, what makes men indispensable is that in a proper masculine-feminine paradigm, the man is the one who gives first. So I always tell men, she's always going to upstage you if you're comparing who really gives more. But where you shine, men, where men shine, is in being the initiator. And what do I mean by being the initiator? The biggest tip that I give to husbands is, when you walk through the door, when you come home from work, and even if she was also out at work, doesn't matter, these things are inescapable. You walk through the door, and you feel beaten down by life. I'm speaking to men. A man feels beaten down by life, and he walks through the door, and he attempts to take emotional comfort from his wife. As much as she will try to provide it, it will not work. It will not work. Because that is not how masculine and femininity interact. I tell men, if you want emotional currency, if you want to receive emotional energy from your wife, the only way to properly get it in a way that is respectful to both of your inherent roles is that you, the male, invest in her first. And what that means, very, very simple terms, I tell men, even if you come home and you're beaten down by life, walk over to her and make a deposit, an emotional deposit. And the beauty of it is she takes everything you put into her and she infinitely upgrades it. So you don't have to give her a lot. You can give her 30 seconds of sustained eye contact and genuine interest where the phone is off. And if you just give her that deposit, you give her that emotional energy, she gets filled up with that. Like she becomes pregnant with that. And then she'll turn around, she'll give birth to infinitely more emotional energy, which will sustain the relationship and which will give you, the man, that emotional connection that you want. But the mistake that a lot of men make is they approach their wives as takers, and then everybody's frustrated and disappointed and heartbroken. But if a man can be the initiator, which means you make the first emotional overture, and even if it's tiny, it's okay. She'll take it and upgrade it and then put it back into the relationship, and then everyone will be happy. And that's what works. So, and you're okay if I tell men that when they come home, they should be the one to make the emotional deposit? You're okay with me telling men that they shouldn't walk through the door? Yeah, I get applause for that. Yeah. What? The minimum possible investment. I can leave out that part. Yeah. Yeah. But you know why I tell them that the minimum, in all seriousness, the reason why I tell them the minimum possible investment is because, and again, I'm not asking you for pity, but men are so daunted, they're so intimidated by the level, what they perceive to be the level of emotional investment that's necessary in the relationship, that they don't even try anymore. And sometimes they just need to be told, hey, just walk through the door and walk to her first, give her eye contact, say hello, and pay attention to her for 1 minute, and you'll be amazed by what comes back to you. As opposed to walk through the door and immediately turn her into your mother and become, this is the complaint that women have. That, oh, he's just another one of the kids. I have kids who cry and they need me, and now this big kid comes home, he needs me. And the reason that that's a complaint is because when in a masculine feminine paradigm, where you have a husband and a wife, a husband can only receive from his wife what he's receiving back from her from the upgraded form of his initial investment. Hey, this is Shais Taub. You were just watching a clip from this class. If you want to get the full context, the full class that this clip that you just watched was from, you watch right here. Click right here.